So as a lot of you know, patch 2.6, which should be the mid-season patch for the finals, is getting delayed by a week or maybe 2 weeks. So we can only assume this is a big patch with a lot of changes. I asked for some ideas on videos to make while we wait for this patch, and a few of you suggested a wishlist video, so here I am. Now, even though this is a top 10, this will not be in any order, and one of these wishes will often mean multiple changes. They're more categories, so this may be a pretty big list by the end, but if you change one aspect of this game, it ends up affecting a lot of other aspects. So I've put this into consideration when making this list. But before I get into the list, let me first explain all these changes should ideally help both lower and higher elos, along with helping the casuals for all the different modes that are there. There are changes that we've seen negatively affect one community while helping the other side. So all these changes should help both sides. So let's get into a hot topic right now. The light specializations. There have been millions of opinions and thoughts on light in general, but here is my thought on the specializations. Grapple. Give it a longer reach and better handling. You can move in various directions to control your path a little bit better. Increasing the control of this could actually help a lot of people out. Also, lowering the cooldown to about 8 seconds could be kind of nice, and this is only about 2 seconds quicker. I do think grapple's not too bad, but I think the overall lack of control is a little bit bad. I think turning it up to a bit more of an extreme thing could kind of make it a little bit more fun and add a little bit more tech. Now dash, honestly, this is in a pretty solid spot. I think a few bug fixes could help this out quite a bit. And then another thing I'd like to at least see tested out is being able to keep the momentum you have when dashing. So if you're going really fast and then you dash, you actually kind of like slow down your momentum. It almost like stops and then carries on with a dash. So I'd like to see it so if you're already moving fast, it keeps that speed or even amplifies it a little bit. I've also heard a couple people suggesting to make it like a blink kind of effect like Tracer, but I think this would actually kind of ruin melee users. It might still be okay for the dagger, but I don't think this is a healthy option. In my opinion, dash is already a pretty core mechanic for a lot of people, and I don't want to kind of remove all the mechanics and muscle memory that they've built up by completely changing it. If they want to add a blink, I think it should just be a 4th specialization. Now onto Cloak. This is probably the biggest topic at hand. This is the low elo and casual destroyer, and realistically, it's the only option if you're gonna go as light and high elo. I personally would love to see more counters to this instead of nerfs to the point where it feels unusable. I think a lot of people really enjoy the mechanics of it, but this is honestly one of the aspects of the finals that doesn't really have counterplay now that we have removed sonar grenades and tracking dart from medium and put them onto light, and then we also got rid of recon. Both classes honestly could have the sonar grenade, and I think this would be a pretty fair compensation for medium. And then also I think when a cloak user gets revealed by a tracking dart, sonar grenade, or even just getting shot at, I think there should be a cooldown on being able to activate cloak again. I think the spam in the middle of the fight was the main issue. I don't necessarily think it was how much the activation costs, because you can still technically do that in the middle of the fight, but now it just feels a little bit clunky to use it, and it feels really awkward to activate it and lose so much of your charge. So I think stuff like this should help counter cloak and make it a little bit easier to face cloak users. This means that you should have an easier time in lower elo dealing with this. It's not like it's impossible to counter, and there should be some options to counter them. But I've also heard people saying that stun is actually the issue, but we're gonna get into that later. Now for the medium specializations. Let's start with sentry turret. This can be very annoying in casual games and low elo, as they do kind of get spammed, especially like triple medium or even double medium, running like 2 of them or even 3. So running into a room of like 2 to 3 turrets is really annoying for sure, but in high elo, this gadget is basically non-existent, and it really doesn't have a place on most team compositions. I personally don't know anyone in the top 100 that uses turret. There might be, but what I'm saying is it's a very rare sight to see, and it often doesn't reach a very high level because team play and team coordination is much more important once you get up to these really high ranks, and the sentry turret just doesn't offer that. So I'd first lower the damage a bit and add an effect where only one player can be targeted by a turret, meaning if you open a door and there's 3 turrets facing you, only one of them can actually shoot you. This will prevent the turret spam in casuals and then make it viable. And then to make it viable in high elo, we add a second effect to the turret, revealing enemies. This will kind of add into the sentry aspect of the turret, where it marks a player and you can kind of track them for a relatively short period. This will help give team utility, and I think this is actually going to help in all elos. It's going to be useful in high elo, as you're going to be able to see people who enter into the cash out room or wherever you put it. And then I think in lower elo, it's not going to get spammed as much, and also you're going to be able to give your team information that you might not get because most people aren't even using a microphone. Next, we have the dematerializer. Honestly, this isn't a bad pick, even in higher elos. There's tons of potential here. I would simply add one more use of demat 4, only because sometimes opening walls, it can get a little bit weird, as you might open like a sliver that doesn't actually give you enough space to move through it. So this could give you that option to just open it up twice and then be able to close it without having to stress about wasting all of your charges. And then we have the dreaded heal beam. Some people have suggested stuff like med packs or healing stations, which all sound pretty good, but could be a lot of work for Embark. I think first things first, do not allow a target to be healed by 2 separate heal beams. This raid boss strat can be very oppressive in lower elos. Next, I'd pull back the effectiveness of healing quite a bit. I think when it comes to what to pick for medium, healing beam is 100% on top. Even though dematerializer can kind of have its place, often you still need a healing beam on your team. And especially in high elo, seeing dematerializer is just very rare. And sentries, like I said, basically non-existent. If you look at any like pro scrims or pickup matches like pugs like that, it's only healing beam. You will not see anything else. But in casual modes, it's just not the go-to for a lot of people because they just rather shoot. So a lot of people just don't want to play it because it's boring to kind of just be like a pocket mercy. I think pulling it back to be more of a burst heal could help immensely. Less time spent healing, more time shooting. Give the heal beam like 3 charges, and with each charge used, you end up healing them for like 50 or something. These numbers could obviously be tweaked, but this means that it's a shorter time to heal, but not as effective as a heal. Now, I think I kind of took a little bit of inspiration from like Ana from Overwatch, because I was thinking the sniper bolt animation could kind of be the time it takes between each charge, then having each charge on its own individual cooldown. This way it helps you kind of get back into the action a little bit faster instead of just, you know, holding your primary button while healing your mesh shield heavy, because that ends up just kind of making your heavy like an unkillable demon, which I don't think is really fun in any elo. I personally like to see heal beam in a spot where it's not just a mandatory pick in higher elo. And a common complaint I hear in lower elo and casual modes is people never actually using the heal beam that they've selected. So if it was easy to just get the effect of healing off without needing to just hold left click, I think this could help out a lot. Now, for change 3, we're going to be talking about heavy specializations. Let's start off with the goo gun. Honestly, this thing is criminally underrated. I just want to remove bloom on these shots to make it more reliable, but honestly, it's a solid option. Charge and slam. I'd like to see some of the damage tweaked and some bug fixes. I think the moments where a charge just instantly deletes your entire health bar in a split second is frustrating. And it's also frustrating when you hit someone with it and it just shoves them to the side and does no damage. Some consistency here would be nice, but overall it's a pretty solid option, and I don't think it needs too much tweaking. I just want it to be more consistent. Now, mesh shield. The recent nerf was actually a great step towards balancing this in higher elos, and it's very common to see it. But let's be real, a few small minority in casual games might want to play that Reinhardt who holds the shield for their team, but I think most people don't seem to enjoy it. A lot of people pick it out of necessity. There are some really fun mechanics that I don't want to lose from it, but I think a way to kind of balance it, since it isn't as oppressive in casual modes, maybe it is kind of oppressive in power shift, but in high elo, it is extremely strong. So I think a way to balance this out would be to add essentially a critical spot, like a headshot multiplier on the shield. This could help make it not as strong when people just continuously hold it up for cover. And that means that the higher elo players that, you know, are able to aim quite well could destroy the mesh quite easily if people are just kind of holding it and not really like playing around the mechanics of it. But it would be nice to be able to build a team comp where this isn't a mandatory pick. Charge and slam is honestly not a bad secondary pick at this point, but it just feels like mesh is in a spot where it really controls the flow of every single battle. All right, now let's get into some weapon changes with change 4, and we'll start off with light again. With the first thing I'm going to say is the XP54, LH1, and the M11 can kind of all stay where they are. The M11 could potentially use a bit of an accuracy buff. I'm not really too sure, but it's honestly not too bad. But I think the XP54 and the LH1 are in probably the best state for light. I think the V9S could use less visual recoil. Again, it's kind of like the M11 where it's really not that bad of a pick. The 93R could use a healthy damage buff, as currently it sits as the worst TTK next to the other guns in this class, excluding stuff like the sniper. The shotgun, I think after the nerf we saw in season 1, this could use a little love. The nerf hit way too hard and this thing is just not good. A damage buff to at least 160 per shot could help with its consistency, and maybe we might see it back in the meta, especially with stuff like a Cloak nerf. I don't think the damage buff to this thing is really going to make it feel too oppressive how it did in season 1. And the sniper could use just better hit registration. The bullet should go where your sight is aiming. This goes for really everything in the game, but snipers feel it the most. Throwing knives, I'd love to be able to just hold the alt click button and release it when I want, rather than being forced to go through the animation. Dagger could use some hit detection fixes for backstab. It's honestly really bad with the dash tech for sword. Honestly, it's not bad, and I just like to see some of the bugs with it fixed. But there are tons of instances where sword one tricks out there prove that it is viable if your mechanics are good. Now for change 5, we're going to talk about medium weapons, and this is where I need to bring out some stats because there's going to be a huge bias based on popularity by the community, and so many people don't really fully understand these stats and the reasons why things get picked. So the AKM and the FAMAS both have a slower TTK than the M60 and the Lewis. This doesn't follow the pattern and design of the game where the lighter, squishier class does more DPS on average. Naturally, the heavier, tankier class should deal less damage based on the existing weapons and the patterns that this follows. The F card does not need a nerf. Yes, feel free to hate me all you want, but the F card does not need a nerf. The issue is it's one of the only viable options on the class. It's actually in a pretty balanced state, and the reason everybody uses it is because it actually puts up a fair fight versus the other classes. The hipfire could potentially use a little bit less because it does kind of destroy lights, but I think in general it's in a pretty good spot. If you use the FAMAS or AKM, you are straight up just at a disadvantage. If you succeed, that's awesome because you are fighting an uphill battle, and that is a sign of skill. So for that reason, we will need to see some buffs here. AKM, I'd like to see kind of like the M11 equivalent, better hipfire, worse at range, better close range. At the moment, FCAR has better close range, better long range, and it's just more accurate. The hipfire feels great. So buff the AKM and the FAMAS so that it's closer to the TTK ranges of the FCAR, but you can have it quickly fall off for the AKM and maybe have better range for the FAMAS. The CL40, I honestly don't see often, and I think it's still pretty good. So I kind of leave it as is. If you guys are big CL40 users, then feel free to let me know what you would change, but I don't really seem to use it and I don't really see it much. I think the fact that the APS is a pretty hard counter is kind of annoying, but I have played with Bipit and Bipit was able to destroy the APSs no problem. It didn't seem to stop him, so take that with a grain of salt. The model 1887 is a very solid choice that feels like it's in a pretty good spot, so I don't think we really need to touch that. The revolver could 100% use some sort of range and accuracy buff, and the riot shield, I think it could be cool if it expanded in size when you alt fire, so when you hold up the shield, just enough to allow it to play with the team a little bit easier, but not to basically replace the mesh shield. And let's get into the heavy's deadly arsenal with change 6. SA-1216 honestly still needs to be pulled back a bit in terms of damage, just so it is more in line with the rest of the weapons, so I dropped the damage just a bit here. Trust me, I understand in casuals it's not that common, but in high elo, this is basically what most heavies run. I think it's kind of between that and the Lewis. And on that note, the Lewis gun's damage could kind of come down a bit, maybe even lowering the RPM by like 10 or 20, and then going back to the old recoil pattern. This weapon is still just as strong as it was before the recoil nerfs, because higher elo players are just going to learn that pattern and then we're just going to be able to use it fine. I think all this does is just kind of ruin the experience for casual players, and anybody who's built up that muscle memory just gets frustrated and has to relearn it. So I don't think that we really needed to change this recoil pattern. I think going back to an easier one could help casuals learn the weapon a little bit easier, but it is pretty strong, so toning down the RPM could be pretty good. I think this would also help kind of create a balance where a lot of the weapons still feel like they're in that pattern of how strong weapons are supposed to be on each class. The M60 honestly is in a pretty solid spot at the moment, along with the flamethrower, so I just kind of look at those numbers compared to the Lewis and then see how you can find a nice balance there. But at the moment, the Lewis and the SA12 do seem to be just a bit ahead of the M60, so I'd like to see them just toned back just a tiny bit so that they're all on par. For Sledgehammer, I think adding a little short burst of sprint when you alt attack could help it a bit, but the Sledgehammer has its place and its utility, so it is kind of hard to kind of balance. And then the MGL, definitely something that could go from being useless to super annoying and OP with the wrong changes. I think making the impact of the grenade explode honestly is kind of a bad idea. It would easily become either too strong or it would just kind of play exactly like the CL40, which could remove the variety from the weapons. I like weapons kind of feeling unique from each other, so I like keeping it with a bounce. So I think adding a line and showing where the grenades are going to blow up could actually help out a lot, and then people could line up their shots a little bit better and start to learn this weapon a little bit more. And then from there, we could see a couple damage tweaks, maybe buffing the damage by just a tiny bit. The KS-23, this thing just kind of needs a damage buff, maybe even make it 110 or 120 a shot, and then increase the destruction damage by a bit too. The reload time could also do it with a little bit of a buff. I would love to use this thing. It just feels really bad when using it. And if you do buff the damage by a bit, this could create a breakpoint where you can actually do a quick melee after in order to finish off lights and mediums, which I think could be a nice little bit of skill expression. Now we got the gadgets to cover, so I'm gonna go over the ones that I think need to be changed with change 7. Let's do light again first. Breaching charge could get a small radius buff. Stun gun could get its duration reduced from 3.75 to 2 seconds, and then extend the duration of enemies not being able to steal the cash out to about 5 seconds. This could help encourage more objective play and less about getting picks on targets, which I think is the main frustration in lower elo, but in higher elo, it's honestly not just meant to get picks. It has a lot of really important team utility. So if it gets nerfed too much, it could kind of ruin that. Thermovision could use a bit of a range increase, and smoke grenade needs a cooldown reduction. 45 seconds is kind of a long cooldown for a pretty lackluster utility. I'd go with about 30 seconds and see where it sits then. Now for medium gadgets with change number 8, increase cooldown on both the zipline and jump pad. At the moment in higher elo, these are the only things that people tend to run. The odd time we bring out the APS or even like a frag, but we're running both of them, and I want to kind of push them back enough that typically people only run one or the other. I don't even know how much further back we'd have to bring the cooldown until either people don't use any of them or they're still using both. I really don't know how it's going to end up, but it would be nice to kind of discourage the doubling up of this, because this kind of exaggerates how strong the medium heavy composition is, and pretty much everybody runs at least one of these. I'd also want to see the cooldown on defib increased as well, and then the data reshaper could give it about 2 charges. This way we could see a little bit more variety in the gadget picks for medium. And on change 9, we'd get to heavy gadgets. I'm gonna start with my big change, the RPG. Now stay with me as I explain this. We're gonna nerf the damage to 60 per shot, give them 2 rockets, reduce self damage to about 20 damage, and then add rocket jumping. This will add some skill expression to higher elo, makes heavy much more enjoyable to play, giving it mobility, which could help its pick rate in lower elo and casuals. And this helps reduce the typical strat that we see specifically in NA, where we use a jump pad with 2 different RPG heavies, and then while we're in air we just double RPG and then ape them with SA12s. This is kind of like the go-to strat that basically everybody is running in scrims and stuff, so hopefully that would kind of be toned back with this. But with that, it would also make it so much more enjoyable to play, and I actually think the pick rate of heavy in lower elo might go up, because I've seen them very oftentimes just killing themselves with RPG, and a lot of people just seem to pick light because they think it's more fun, and I think rocket jumping could be a really fun mechanic to learn. This would also make fighting against heavies a lot more enjoyable, because it can be kind of annoying when they open up every fight with just getting RPG'd and now you have like half your HP. Seeing a heavy jump around in midair would be kind of cool. And since the weapons did get nerfed, I think this would kind of add to the balance here if we were to add better in-air accuracy, just slightly better to compensate for this new playstyle. You might also need to reduce the slam part of charge and slam, as rocket jumping into a slam would be deadly, but also would be so damn fun. The motion sensor also just needs a bigger radius. I think the concept is good, but execution is pretty bad. And the anti-gravity cube honestly feels pretty solid. I just reduced the cooldown to 30 instead of 40, so it's more in line with the power of the C4. I'd then make a pretty big change here where the dome shield would remove the ability to shoot through it and make it more like a Gibby bubble from Apex. And then you can increase the health to about 400. This would make it better for stealing cash outs. It would make it less of a must pick in all elos, because I think a lot of people just use it to win a lot of fights, and could potentially create, again, more skill expression while you're able to play in and out of the dome. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten free kills that I had no right getting, where I'm about like 50 HP, someone's chasing me full health, I just throw this dome, turn around and kill them. It feels very cheesy, and I'd like heavy to feel less cheesy and a little bit more fun. For change 10, we have a few quality of life changes. HP regen for light, I think a shorter cooldown for the passive regen would help to balance it a bit. Medium could get a slightly shorter cooldown as well. This could also again discourage the healing beam from being so mandatory, and helps with the in and out playstyle that you see from light and DMAP mediums. I'd also like to see the pyronades cooldown shorten and flashbang to get a slightly bigger radius, so that all classes get 2 more options to pick from, as those tend not to be picked really ever. I'd also like to see a streamer mode and the option to have ranks hidden from ranked, as that has only created an environment where people are either too scared to face the diamond team, or they just try to single out and focus that streamer that they know so that they can grief their rank. Of course, a bigger population would help solve a lot of the rank disparity, but we do have to work with what we are given. I think there's tons of bugs that could be fixed and other optimizations, etc., that are to be expected with time, so I'm not going to include those here, but I think making ranked more accessible is a big thing I'm an advocate for. Places to learn the ins and outs better, make the game visually easier to understand, like making it more obvious you get 1,000 for tapping a vault, 2,000 for inserting the cash box, and 1K for stealing a cash out. Maybe even a timer on the vaults that is an exact number instead of just this visual pie shape. Since most veterans, we kind of know the timer by heart, but it isn't clear to newer players. The finals is a complex game, and the game does a pretty poor job of teaching you all the things that you need to know. And a bonus for change 11, I'd like if you all subscribed. Thank you to all my members. Again, comment any changes you want to see in the mid-season patch, or comment below how bad I am and how I know nothing about this game, yada yada yada. I'm still loving this game, and I want everyone to be able to play in an environment that is fair and fun to them. No matter what weapon or gadget you use, keep improving, and I will see you in the finals.